Hi, Mike. Hi, Sarah.
Hey, good morning.
How are you, Mike?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Um,
Time am I?
I'm looking forward to hearing your talk in a few minutes. I
Great.
just wanted to let you know I've switched around some of the presenters, so I've put so you'll be the third speaker, if
The
that's okay.
third.
Yeah.
So I'm not on at 12.
No. So
No.
you'll be you'll be the last one, so you'll probably be on at like 12:30.
12:30.
45.
No worries.
Yes. Sorry about that. It's just that it was a better fit to put the other two first.
Okay.
Yeah, I have one speaker decided to co-present with someone else, and I thought it'd be better to do that.
Okay.
But
So can
anyway.
I try and share my screen? Is that okay?
Yeah, try.
You recording, are you? Maybe pause recording.
I'll edit everything out that's
Okay.
not in the webinar.
No worries. I just want to share my screen and just check that everything's okay. I'll start the presentation first. One moment. Start presentation. And then I should be able to go into Zoom and share my screen. Let's see.
Hi, Ellie. Thanks for joining.
How does
Mike's
that
just
look?
testing out the screen sharing. Great, it works. I can see your
And I can see it too.
presentation, Mike.
Hopefully I can get it to work
Yeah.
at the right time. All right, I'll stop sharing one moment. If I can find the stop share thing. Oh, there it is. Beauty.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us, Ellie.
My pleasure.
Hi, Lorwai.
That looks like a nice plane you're on, Laura.
Hello, everyone. It's called jumping from one call to another, and yeah, private plane. I tell you, that's the only way to go.
Yeah.
But I'm early. Good. Okay,
Yes,
I'm just going to go and grab a cuppa before we start.
Yeah, I just got
We
mine.
have a few minutes. Yeah.
Have you got a cup of Ellie? Or?
The kettle just finished boiling, so I'm going to step aside for a moment as well.
See, as academics, we got our priorities right.
I know. I've got my water.
I have that too.
Less caffeinated. Yeah. We'll wait a few minutes for more people to join.
I was hoping I could go first.
Sorry?
I was hoping I was going to be first.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mike.
This means everyone will say all the good stuff, and then I'll be left last to pick up the crumbs.
No, I don't think so. I think I think because the first project is really concrete and it is really talking about like the specific project.
Okay.
Whereas yours is more like the journey that you've done and the journey that Samri's done as well in terms of consumer engagement. So I thought it was better fitting that way. Yeah, but great that you've accepted. I was super pleased when you said yes. Yeah. I see more people are joining, trickling in. We'll start late in a few minutes. We're early, we're just setting up. So I might actually mute myself for the moment and make sure everything else is in place. Hi, Janet and Nari.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you? Thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Yeah. I'll just wait maybe a minute or two to see who else is joining us online, and then we can begin the webinar.
Yep.
I will just share my screen to start. To have it in the background. Can everyone see my full screen presentation? Beautiful. All right, well, given that it is 12:01, I know lots more people will be joining us online, given the registration, but in the interest of time, I'll just begin the webinar right now and start our session, our week 2 of the Spotlight series. So, whoops. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Agustina Gancia. I am the Senior Project Officer at Health Translation SA, and I lead all of the consumer engagement as well as the capacity building portfolio that HTSA leads in its work. Before we begin today's presentation, I'd just like to acknowledge the Ghana people as the traditional custodians of the Adelaide region. We recognize the Ghana people's cultural, spiritual, physical, and emotional connection with their land. We honor and pay our respects to the Ghana elders, both past and present, and all generations of Ghana people now and into the future. I would also like to acknowledge possibly other lands that people are joining us from today, given that I think people are joining us from across South Australia as well as interstate. So welcome, everyone. What's the Spotlight series? It's a quarterly capacity building initiative that HTSA started last year in 2021. It is shining a light on a specific research translation topic for a month long of activities. Some of our initiatives include the weekly webinars, sharing online resources through our social media channels, sharing links to publications, to websites, and every Spotlight series has a different topic. This month, it's consumer engagement, and we're on week 2. Today's webinar is going to be called Consumer Engagement in Action, What's Worked and What's Challenging. We'll be hearing from people who have a vast experience doing consumer engagement, very different contexts, and they'll be sharing to us their projects, their experience, and their learnings. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd just like to introduce HTSA. Who are we? What do we do? Our purpose is to accelerate the translation of research findings into healthcare practice and policy, and to increase a whole of system research translation capacity to improve the health of all South Australians. What does that mean? It's that we consider ourselves to be independent catalysts and brokers to mobilize collaborations and to bring people together to ensure that research is actually applied and actually translated into practice, into policies, and we connect people together. So we connect health services to researchers, to different stakeholders, to policymakers and consumers and the community. And that's exactly what we'll be delving in today, really, and through the whole month, really, thinking about how to better engage with the community to ensure that the research is relevant. Research translation is a mindset. So oftentimes researchers might think, oh, I've done a research project, it's time for me to implement it or to translate to the next step. It's actually a mindset, and it happens all throughout the research project. You have to always think, what is the ultimate problem you're trying to address? And who's the next user? Who's the end user at the end of the day of what we're creating, what we're discovering? And so consumer engagement and community engagement really falls into this. It's ensuring that you engage those people who will benefit from the research from the get-go, from the beginning, from the concept. So I will stop talking now and introduce our first speakers. Our first speakers today will be Associate Professor Janet Kelly and Nari Sinclair. Janet is a nurse researcher who works collaboratively with Aboriginal community members and health and research professionals in urban, rural, and remote areas to improve healthcare experiences and outcomes. Over the last 10 years, she's co-developed a range of Aboriginal patient journey and health journey mapping tools and case studies that identify specific barriers and enablers to care. Nari is a Ngarrindjeri and Yorta Yorta woman, mother, and auntie with extensive lived experience of kidney disease, dialysis, transplantation, comorbidities, healthcare access, and mobility access challenges. Nari was the co-founder of the Action 1 reference group and is a keen advocate for improvements in transport, accommodation, financial assistance, and improved care delivery, particularly for rural and remote renal patients. She's successfully lobbied politicians, attended parliament, and conducted radio, television, and newspaper interviews. So I will stop sharing my screen and invite Janet and Nari to share their screen. And please, you can unmute yourself as well.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Okay, now I'll just get this, just make sure we get the right screen. Okay, and then, so we've got 3 screens, so we're just working ourselves out. And now if I share that, does that show the whole PowerPoint slide? Yeah, good, excellent. I'll just go back a couple of slides. There we go, thank you.
Yep.
So thank you for inviting us to be part of this webinar. So we're talking on behalf of Action, which is Aboriginal Kidney Care Together, Improving Outcome Now. So we too would like to acknowledge that we're meeting today on the lands of the Kaurna people and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. If you want to add, that's okay. No. Okay. So Action. So do you want to talk about Action now?
It's Aboriginal Kidney Care Together, Improving Outcomes Now. And the aim is to prove kidney care for First Nations in South Australia and beyond. And based at the Uni of Adelaide Nursing School. And is that right?
Yeah, we can come to that. We'll do the next one. So what's been really exciting about the Action project is that all the way through, it's been really strongly community-led. So originally, we had 10 people, and Nari, you and Inna really started off the reference group, didn't you? Yeah. So when we were first interested in doing something in the area, we sort of went, well, who should we talk to? And people said, talk to Nari, talk to Inna.
And then we went to Kidney Health.
Yeah, and Kidney Health got involved as well.
Yeah.
So we started off doing some community consultations, and so checking out where was the best site to do the first community consultation, how best to go about it. It was very much talking with you, Nari, and with Inna, and say what day would be best, what time would be best, how best could we go about this, who should we invite, how should we invite them, what food should we have. All of these things were really important. And so from there came together the reference group. And so there was a range of different people that came with different experiences. It was, the group sort of grew through networks. And yes.
From the hospitals, we filtered out. So
so there's some of them were people that you and Inna invited, and then sometimes some of the doctors or nurses might suggest that this person would be
we gave an invitation out for every Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person to attend the community consultation, and then we chose the reference group out of that. So.
And there was a real coming together of the 2 different kind of systems and networks. So the clinical health services network and also community networks coming together, and then all those suggestions coming together, and then the reference group then worked out how they wanted to proceed with that. Yeah. So in Action 1, so we got funding through Health Translation SA through a MRFF grant, which was fantastic to help start this off, bringing together community members, health professionals and project people. And first of all, there was a reference team, reference group members who came and helped guide the research. But then when we got it to Action 2, we changed things quite a lot. And we'll just go to our next slide, where what we really wanted to do was to level the playing field. And instead of having healthcare and researchers in this top-down, bottom-up process, we really wanted to level the playing field to ensure we could have these important two-way conversations. And an important part of that was Nari, you and Kelly and Rani all became chief investigators. So some of the medical professions and the senior researchers stepped down to be associate investigators. It was led, the project is led by Dr. Kim O'Donnell, who's an Aboriginal woman, and that we had 3 community members as chief investigators.
Yep.
Yeah, so that became really important. And then we tried to really embed the decolonisation concept and make it real, which has been interesting.
Yeah.
Easy to say and sometimes hard to do.
Hard to do because you just can't get through it sometimes.
Yeah, we'll talk about that on our last slide about some of the challenges that we found. But when we were talking about the stuff that made a difference, it was making sure we prioritise Aboriginal ways of knowing, being and doing, which were really important.
Yeah.
And that usually we got to know through conversations, spending time yarning.
Having our yarning groups.
Yeah. And one of the things that's really important, and we still do every week, is when we meet on a Wednesday, what do we do first thing in the morning?
Spirit checks.
Yeah. Do you want to explain what that is?
We go around and just ask everyone how we go, because sometimes we've got down days and up days, and so yeah, we're just there to support each other, and because we're all going through the same problems, kidney health, and so we all get there and help each other.
And it's important that we don't just jump straight into the meeting, which as a white fellow nurse and researcher I can tend to do. And I have to keep reminding myself it's actually important that we build relationship each week when we meet again, all of us. Yeah. Then the other thing is really recognising Nari and the other team members as being experts. So they're experts with a lot of knowledge, and their expertise is just as important as the nephrologists, as the other senior researchers. It's really important. Do you want to tell the story about the T-shirts?
Yeah, we got T-shirts done up, and now they know us from our T-shirts. I went to dialysis last night, and the nurse goes, "Oh, I've heard about you," and so I just said, "Oh, okay." She goes, "Yeah, she heard about us through the T-shirt." So
it's really good. So that the word sort of spreads wide, and we all have the same T-shirts. We have some of these, and you've got the white T-shirt on. You probably can't quite see there, but now he's got the other Action T-shirt on. Everybody in the team wears the same Action T-shirt, so it doesn't matter if you're a nephrologist, if you're a community member, if you're a researcher, a research assistant. We all wear the same T-shirt. There's a couple of different versions of them, but that's part of that really visible. We recognise all knowledges as important, so that's been really a great thing, and a lot of people wear their Action T-shirts with pride, which is wonderful. And the Indigenous governance is real and embedded, and we have conversations about it most weeks about if something arises or how do we discuss this, and it's not lip service, it's real, isn't it? Yeah. So when we're thinking about some of the things that are working, it's because we've had real outcomes. So doing the community consultations together were really important, and they've informed not only locally what's happening here and with health services, but we've also informed the inaugural national KARI guidelines for culturally safe care, kidney care for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And we have a launch of these guidelines this Sunday at Kangawadley, the Aboriginal hostel. So these have been 4.5 years in the making. But one of the things that's been important is that community voices have informed the national clinical guidelines alongside peer-reviewed literature. So they've been seen as equal, if not more important, so that these guidelines will actually respond to what community members are asking for. And this has been happening around Australia, and we've played a part in that.
Yeah.
When we had the consultations, people, particularly people from rural and remote, were saying how hard it was to get to dialysis, weren't they? That was
yeah, they just wanted to dialyse at Gangawadli where they feel safe. They didn't have to go to the big hospitals and all that. So
because people spend a whole day, don't they? By the time
Yeah.
they get picked up, go for dialysis, have to wait to get picked up again and
Yeah.
come back. It could be a whole day, 3 times a week. And if people are down from country, English is their 3rd or 4th language, was really difficult. So there was a negotiation, and health services were also looking at it. So now there's 2 and nearly 3
yeah,
dialysis chairs at the Aboriginal hostel. So rather than people having that hugely traumatic experience 3 times a week, they can now just walk across the courtyard past the open fire pit and go and have their dialysis, which is beautiful.
yeah.
And we've linked oral health and kidney health, because one of the biggest barriers for people to get onto the transplantation list is to get their teeth. That's one of the things you have your oral health checks in order to have transplant.
Yeah.
Then community kept saying repeatedly that this is an issue, and healthcare was also concerned about it. So we're doing lots of work bringing together oral health and kidney health, which has been good. And there's the oral health students from TAFE have just started their clinical placements at Kangaroo. So we've been quite creative about how to bring groups together. We've been working on health journey mapping tools, so people's stories can be told in their entirety. Yep. And also the Action Reference team have made a video to accompany the new clinical guidelines. What was the best thing about that for you?
They listened to what we said. Yeah, like I said, it's about time someone listens. Yeah.
And you got to get your words.
Yeah, I got to get my words out and recorded them, so they're listening now. So
Yeah, it's important. I'm just checking how I get time. And then when we think about what's been challenging, it's been interesting trying to fit where community are at in with the university systems. That's been challenging at times, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So navigating the university processes. So, for example, if community members don't have ID that the university requires for employment, there's a whole lot of workarounds that we do. And I must say, once we know how to navigate it, there's always a way through. But it did take us 6 months to onboard our elder person into the team, because it was it's part of, sorry, I'll do her light. As part of our decolonisation process, we're bringing in new roles and positions, and then it's working out where they fit within existing systems and structures. And things like a 2-step authentication to do a casual timesheet is very difficult if you don't have a reliable phone and IT. So we've had to do very creative workarounds when people are on dialysis, when there's a dialysis nurse there who can read the second code, and all this time it gets interesting. So that have been some of the things that have been challenging, but it's wonderful working with community and bringing community into research. And then there's these practical things that take a lot of time to sort through because of the way we set up our Western systems. Yeah. And then the role definition, working out everyone's roles. That's taken a little while.
We had to work out what hat we're wearing.
Yes, because you have 3 hats in the project, don't you?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about those?
I have a reference group member, I'm a CI, and
the project team.
And the project team as well. So I've got 3 hats.
Yeah, so we have lots of discussions around who makes what decision and how. And because it's decolonising and emerging, we've had to have lots of, that's the other reason why we have lots of relationship building, isn't it? Because we have to talk through some of those difficult conversations at times. Yep. Yeah, that's been good. And then meeting, this is one you were talking about as well, Nari, wasn't it? About how do you meet community expectations? Because community expects things of you.
Yeah.
And all the other community members.
Yep.
And then we have the research outcomes and goals. And then there's what we need to do for the university as well.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk to that?
All at the same time, it's just hard because with the university, we don't know what they're expecting us to do. So yeah, it's a bit hard.
And learning a whole new system whilst running with a project.
Yeah.
And doing things with community.
Yeah. With community, it's hard as well because you don't know who you're going to run into or something. So
every so often we have a little hiccup, don't we?
Yeah.
Something might be happening that we might trip into and
yeah, so
yeah.
We'll get through it.
Yeah, we do. The other thing around the NHMRC grant that was really useful was when we were putting the grant in, Nari, for example, wasn't employed by the university. And so it was really important that when we looked at her affiliation, it could be to the community, which was possible. We just need to make phone calls and have a conversation. So I think a lot of systems are changing so that we can include consumers and that they can represent the communities they come from rather than having to represent an organisation. So that was really important. And yeah, and we have fun. That's been the other important thing, hasn't it? So when we get together, we do the serious stuff, but we also do the fun stuff.
Yeah. Style it up.
Style it up.
Mm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janet and Nari. That was a fascinating presentation, and I've made some notes where I was agreeing. I was like, yes, that is so right and so true. I want to open up the room for questions, but I'm thinking of doing this towards the end after we've spoken to the two other speakers, and then we can open the room for questions for all three presentations. So if you're in the audience, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box or wait until the end of the three presentations. I love that presentation. That was so great. The project is fantastic. I would love to hand over the mic now to Ellie Hodges, who combines her, actually, I will share my screen to put her little photo up before we go to her presentation. Our next speaker is going to be Ellie Hodges, and she's the executive director and founder of Lelan. So she combines her professional, personal, and socio-political worlds, centering lived experience and a commitment to transformative systems change. Ellie has worked in the community and mental health sectors for over 20 years as a community development lead, therapeutic practitioner, manager, educator, strategy policy worker, advisor, and consultant. She has lots of hats. She founded Lelan, the Lived Experience Leadership and Advocacy Network, a now funded organization that she leads as executive director. So I'll stop sharing and let Ellie share her slides.
Thank you so much. Just put these up. Can you now see my slides?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. I come to you today from Gadigal land of the Eora Nation. I'm in Sydney for a conference, but normally office is on Kaurna land and I live up on Ngadjuri country. And when we're talking about mental health suicide, it's really important to look at the systemic racism and impacts for our First Nations communities and how we, so myself and leader of an organisation that is white, can be allies as well and giving voice and space to people. It's also recognising other injustices that live within our systems and cause harm and being allies around that and drawing attention to some of what is really hard for people. I'm talking today about, so these slides are co-logoed of Lelan and the University of South Australia. This speaks to research that we did. It was funded in 2019 by philanthropy, and it was the first funding that Lelan actually had as an organisation, and we're now a team of 7. which is really great growth for us, and making sure that people with lived experience of mental distress, social issues and injustice are heard within our system, and that we also lead work, which we are increasingly doing ourselves and setting our own strategy and projects. But this one was with University of South Australia's Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Research and Education Group. And what we did was, it was research and capacity building around lived experience leadership and how it can be used as a lever to transform systems. And we were trying to understand what that looked like. And through this work, Leland had the critical role of a backbone organisation to ensure that this wasn't dropped, because lived experience involvement, consumer engagement, it's the first thing that goes within big services and beastly organisations when there's other priorities, lack of budget, passionate people who get it leave roles, and things like that, that you may have that experience or not, but that's what I've witnessed many times in many different contexts. And so we chose intentionally a systems change approach around lived experience leadership. And part of what underpinned that was when we looked at what had been written about lived experience in the past, they would talk about, the lived experience community would talk to the lived experience community, and the system and sector people would talk to the system and sector people. And we wanted to bridge that gap. And that was to build relationship and partnership, true partnership that about equal power, but also so we could understand from system and sector leaders where the soft entry points were so that we could essentially infiltrate that way. That's actually the bigger plan, so that lived experience could gain bigger ground within systems and decision making as well. And there's some really good arguments around a systems change approach. And so, you know, social challenges these days are entrenched and systemic. And when we try and solve issues, we're not going deep enough, we're not disruptive enough, and we don't explore enough. And so by taking this approach and bringing in multiple organisations, NGOs, government and community, it was trying to get that depth, get that innovation, and explore from many different angles. And there's this quote as well. I started in youth development, and I knew Karen Pittman then and all of her work around youth development. So when we were doing this work to revisit some 15 years later, just that programmatic interventions help people beat the odds, but systems interventions can help change their odds. And that's what we're really interested in at Leland as a systems advocacy organisation. And if people that still question why people with lived or living experience should be involved, clear arguments around this is that it's essential that systems remain rooted in action and do not become too removed from the people that it's designed to help. And this second quote here is from an article that I'll share the picture of in a moment, The Water of Systems Change, and is a model that I have in my head and that we really centrally used in this work. They give the case study of building healthy communities in Southern California. They had $1 billion, 10 years, 14 communities, and 90 organizations trying to improve health and well-being of those communities. And they said that with all of that money, investment and commitment and interest and passion, they concluded that plugging the voice of the community into the right kind of political power grid will do more to create health and wellness than any other single intervention. I think that's pretty astonishing that with all of what they had access to, that's what they came back to. And when we look at mental health lived experience and peer work, there's return on investment studies that have been done. I think it's light on because research is only just catching up. But for every dollar invested in peer support, there's a $1.27 return. $3.27 return, sorry. So this is the cover of the article that I just mentioned. Through our work, we actually, with over 20 system and sector leaders, and lived experience leaders, we unpacked why, the question we posed was, why isn't lived experience leadership, with all of the talk about involving people lived experience, why are we not seeing that embedded within our systems and services and decision making? And what we came up with were these things. They told us that policy, it's normally a power down strategy done by a small group of people and often the same people, and they're really removed from community and understanding the real issues, and it doesn't match need. In terms of practices, they told us that education is a core strategy for bringing change and improving practice, for changing culture. They told us that we need compassionate responses. In terms of resource flows, they said that funding comes with restraints. Don't know if anyone has found that yourselves. And it's also really easy for the people that hold the money to say, oh no, there's no money, which isn't the reality. There is money, they're just choosing not where to put it and having different priorities or different reasons. And we also heard that in South Australia, we have a pretty conservative approach and very risk averse around things. Other structural elements that we unpacked was medical model dominance, particularly in mental health, where there's some conflict between what we hear from people with lived experience and if we really want to bring social determinant understanding and trauma-informed approaches. They talked about the lack of political will and just ineffective policy, or just the real lag from what we know from community into service design. So in some ways, like research can be top down or bottom up, and we're all trying to, shift both sideways to come together through this piece of work. And for relationships and connections, we heard they are key. And Leland has seen that in our development. So I founded Leland in 2017 in the middle of the night, essentially. In 2019, we got our first funding, which was this piece of work. And over the years, the influence that we have and who we can get in a room now or who we can get to a table with is very different around that. And so our sphere of influence is growing, and that's not just because of Leland and what we've done. There's lots of growth around lived experience, and government and bureaucracy and research and services really looking to do better as well. But relationships have been fundamental, because at the end of the day, when we're talking about involving people with lived experience in really solid partnership ways, we have to shift power. And just doing it, the structural change doesn't do that. And that's why we have the ineffective policy and all of the problems that we still see. And they identified many layers of power dynamics that exist. And for the transformative change, we need to change mental models. And what they told us gets in the way of lived experience leadership really being embedded and changing our systems, the biomedical dominance illness narrative. So the language that we use is a hindrance, and that broader perspectives are required. And we held a couple of summits, and that's where this came from. After our first summit in 2019, and then we had another one in 2021, we heard that collective efforts were seen as the only way to move forward on strengthening, embedding, and creating space for lived experience leadership to flourish. No one person, no one agency could take responsibility or own it, but it was identified that we do actually need a single recognised entity to lead it, because it will get lost in the burn and churn of the system, is a direct quote from someone that we interviewed. And as a result of this work, last August, we actually published a roadmap for strengthening lived experience leadership for transformative systems change in South Australia. So that's it sums up our research and co-design activities. And also through that, we developed in the second summit that was held last year with over 40 sector and system leaders. And when I say that, they are top and second tier executives of government, NGO peak bodies and NGOs and lived experience leaders who developed this consensus statement together about how we could take action to improve things in SA for lived experience leadership and embedding it based on our research. And we also published the world's first model of lived experience leadership. So this is the skills, qualities, attributes of what lived experience leaders bring to the table and how they can develop and grow themselves. And that has just last month been published in a peer-reviewed Health in Leadership journal. These are some of the key actions from our research and activities and the consensus statement that we landed on. So it's increasing lived experience leaders in governance, cultural change programs, strengthening learning pathways, funding lived experience organisations and groups. It's ensuring resource flows around meaningful co-production. I heard, because I'm at a conference in Sydney, someone said that, all the talk about co-pro, it's more about, there's a lot of co-fo out there. People saying it's co-production and it's not even close. I quite liked that. It's promoting lived experience leadership and accountability and putting in service agreements and having KPIs. Service leaders told us they want that. And sure models of care include lived experience workforce and peer support and change other infrastructure. When we think about these things and what worked well, so what we actually did, we used a collaborative impact approach. And so the 5 core elements of a collaborative impact approach is on the left, and some of the things that we did around building a common agenda. So we went to the people to define lived experience leadership. And we did that through focus groups, summits, interviews, co-design. We built relationships and we got buy-in. We found people that cared, and then we kept going back to them. It wasn't a once-off thing at all. And it built over time as relationships built as well. We had the summits. We had 2 summits. We came up with shared measurement. So what conditions do people need to care about this in their work? We heard from people that, and the old saying, you measure what matters, and what matters is measured. So what does that look like in this space? And encourage shared accountability. How do we grow this together? We looked at coordination across organizations and sharing, rather than having really insular protective behaviors about what people were doing. We had a community of practice that met every 6 weeks, and we've just paused for a couple of months, but it's coming back in November. So every 6 weeks on a Wednesday morning, it was a community of practice for lived experience leadership and change. And we would share a resource and then have a really enriching discussion. We had newsletters and putting information out, so continuous communication. It was because it was so linked with Lelland's development as an organisation. It was fairly visible, this work, because that's why we exist. And because of this work and other things that Lelland has done, we became a state election promise this year and now have state funding as the peak for lived experience in South Australia. We built trust through that messaging. The backbone support, it needed us to keep driving it. And it also helped that we had the research in the background of this. And strategically, when we pitched to get this philanthropic funding, it was based on the idea that this research would be Lelland's argument for why we need to continue to exist. So it's quite strategic as well. We created shared resources. We don't want to own this. It's just thought leadership that we want to add into the space and contribute. And we mapped the system. So some of what I've just said is here. There were champions. We did public and NGO mental health service organisations, and we did community and people with lived experience really leading and championing. We built commitment and trust and a shared agenda and platform for action. Challenges that are always in this space is the infrastructure to sustain action and impact. So when Lelland's future was really uncertain, it was not knowing whether this would just be a two-year project that would then cease, and the momentum that is built. There's always how you keep momentum but then grow with that. It's maintaining the system focus rather than organizational, and that because Lelland is independent, we can get people in a room and talking in ways that they don't normally, because there's no competition. We don't fund, we don't provide service, but we just are very centered on building the voice, influence, and leadership of lived experience. We had shared metrics in the consensus statement, and COVID clearly the last couple of years really impacted this, but we navigated that quite well in the end. We just had to shift some dates and everyone was really understanding, but it did potentially change some of what could have been achieved, but I also think it may have added as well by just different connection and allowing more people to become involved also. And so this is a quick summary of the model for lived experience leadership that we developed that I won't speak to, but it's really, if you are doing research or bringing consumers and community in, if they are doing their role and their job as lived experience leaders, this is what they're bringing. And then if you find that hard, so what is sort of what I say, because that's what you're asking them to do. So if they're championing justice and trying to bring accountability to you, you've actually invited that in and they're doing their job. And I know that that can be hard sometimes for people, but that's what lived experience leadership is. And And they do have to network and be together, and they are change focused. So that's why we sometimes ask the questions we do. And then this beautiful quote from Lilla Watson, a proud Gangala woman. It's remembering in all of this work, and I'm an ally, I'm also a person with lived experience, but if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine and you recognize that, then let us work together. And I think that's what, to me, good work in this space is about. If you want to know more about what I've spoken about, there's our URL to go to, the Activating Lived Experience Leadership Project. It has the roadmap, consensus statement and model, and it has background research papers that we did in the lead up as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ellie. That was such a great presentation, and I feel there is a lot of links to what was said in the previous presentation as well. I completely agree with so many of the points that you said. I mean, that's why we're here today. And like I said earlier, if people have questions for Ellie, please put them in the chat box or keep them in your head. We're going to go straight now to Dr. Mike Musker, who's joining us from UniSA. I'll just put his little picture up to introduce him. Mike has worked in mental health as well, as a senior registered mental health nurse for 30 years. He was in a senior research fellow position at the Mind and Brain theme at the South Australian Health and Medical Research Institute, SAMRI, for 7 years before becoming an enterprise fellow at UniSA. Mike's current research focuses on depression and obesity, genetics of depression, chronic fatigue syndrome, mental health promotion, and consumer involvement in mental health. So I will stop sharing and hand over the microphone to Mike, who's also collaborated with HTSA and SAMRI for many years, and I think he'll give a snippet of that in his presentation.
Thank you, Agustina,
No
firstly
worries.
for the invite. I think it's a great idea that you're putting this series on. And also, it's been a pleasure to listen to both Ellie, Janet and Nari. What great present. I feel like a bit of an amateur really, coming on after those two speakers, but I'll press on anyway. I love your work, Janet and Nari. I think that's amazing. All the thoughtful stuff that you talked about, like even the type of foods that you will think about when you meet and stuff. And I love that idea of checking your spirit level and how you're feeling. I think that's wonderful. And Ellie, I'm already aware of your work, amazing stuff that you're doing out there in the mental health space. So keep on fighting and keep on doing what you do. It's marvelous. So thank you very much. And I think I'll start my presentation then. So again, thanks, Agustina. I'll see if I can get it to work. Would be good. There we go. So I would like to acknowledge that we are on the lands of the Kaurna people here in South Australia. I'm actually hailing from North Terrace and Frome at the UniSA, and it's good to know that I hope to be collaborating a bit more with Ellie as part of the mental health and suicide prevention research group, so that would be great. And I'd just like to acknowledge as well that this is Aboriginal land and always was, always will be, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And for anybody listening today who's an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, I'd like to say Nina Mani, and I hope I've pronounced that right in a Liverpool accent, because that's where I hail from originally. So I hope that's close to saying good day. Oh, good stuff. So Agustina said it's more of an attitude, really. It's about a belief in what you're doing, and it's not just talking about. It's not just about using the words of participation and engagement. It's about believing in it. So I wrote this article 25 years ago when I was a younger lad, and I've always tried to empower the consumers that I've worked with. I worked in the most sort of highest security, maximum security facility in the UK. but I did my level best to ensure that the people that I worked with were empowered. So a lot of the patients I worked with were violent, and but some of the reasons why they're violent is because of the system they're in. And so by engaging with them and having a relationship with them, it actually reduced some of that violence. So I do believe in empowerment and engagement, and I've used it throughout my career. And I'll talk a bit more about that as I go by. So when I first came to South Australia, there were no consumer engagement groups that I was aware of. I worked with James Nash House, the forensic mental health facility, and I started up consumer and carer participation groups in mental health. And again, that was another maximum security facility, quite not a nice system to be in. I did my best to empower the consumers that lived in that space and to help them, give them a little bit of power wherever we could. And so as South Australia, as I came here in 2001 from the UK, they'd already started using these sort of processes. But over the last 20 years, there's been great developments in using peer specialists and carer specialists. So people who have lived experience of mental health, but also the relatives who look after people in the community who have mental health issues. All right, moving on then. I then started at SAMRI in 2014, and I used the same system of having consumer engagement that I had in the health service. I brought that to the research space. So when I became a research fellow at SAMRI in the mind and brain theme, I started up a consumer and carer engagement group, so that I wanted to know what consumers were interested in research, not just what the researchers wanted to research. So that's the process, speaking to people about, from the bottom up, what would you like us to research, rather than saying, we're interested in researching this, would you like to come and talk about it? We actually started with the engagement process. I was also supportive of the inaugural consumer advisory group at SAMRI, and I was a member of that until I moved from SAMRI to HTSA last year. I've worked with the MECFS and community. That's a piece of research I was doing at HTSA, which is it's basically the myalgic encephalomyelitis, I'll say that correctly, myalgic encephalomyelitis chronic fatigue syndrome. People who suffer from chronic fatigue syndrome, there's a particular community group that I engaged with, and they really assisted me with my research, and I'll tell you a bit more about that too. Another thing I've chaired, again in mental health, was an MRFF, which is a research type of funding from the national government. And it was a group called AI Squared, where I chaired a group of consumers and carers and engaged them in how we want to do this research. So there's just a couple of examples of engaging consumers.